souls for coming out in the nasty weather. And I know there were other people who wanted to come, and I'll probably do this again sometime in a few months. Seeing as it's Canada's 150th anniversary, it seems like an appropriate thing to do. But anyway, I've been studying Sheffield's history for quite a while, mostly just skimming the surface. There's always lots more to delve into. And so this is a work in progress for me. And I'll just take you through kind of a whirlwind tour of Sheffield's history here. We do lots more, a lot of the things that come up. But anyway, I'm going to go back to the native history. And of course, people always say that Canada has a really short history. But if you look at the native history, of course, it isn't very short at all. But then, as was pointed out to me recently, the natives don't look at history quite the same way as well. They don't have quite as strict a sense of it, and we tend to, Westerners tend to really put a lot of history to things. I mean, they could write a whole history on this pew here, whereas the natives have a bit more of a loose concept of the past. But anyway, the history of the natives in this area is not quite as well known, partly because the ones who lived here for quite a while got wiped out and didn't really survive into the era where there would be more history recorded about them. We do know that they would have lived in villages like this, and the name that I've always known them by is the Neutral. I think they were also called the Attawanderans, and I was hoping Rebecca Brain was going to show up tonight. She was thinking about it. She did her PhD on these natives, and maybe we can get her to do a talk on them sometime. But anyway, you can see this kind of setup at Crawford Lake. They've got a replica there over by Milton, and it's really neat. Recreated the longhouses. They haven't been there for 300 years or so, but they know that the natives were living near the lake there and did have a village. From what we know, these kind of villages didn't stay in one place for very long. They would move about every 30 years. They tended to, they were farmers. They were growing corn, or what we call corn, what's known as maize or Indian corn. And they tended to exhaust the soil where they were living and would move on and set up somewhere else every 30 years or so. And they got the interior recreated there nicely as well. And they would have multiple families living in these longhouses. Some of you are probably familiar with this kind of culture. They are cousins of the Iroquois, or the five nations, the Huron, further north in Ontario, and they got wiped out by the Five Nations during the wars between them and the Huron. Now in this area, there's, you can find arrowheads out in fields if you're lucky. Probably the most impressive native artifact ever found in this area was this boulder, which Mr. Hall is familiar with, has heard some stories about, which I didn't even know about until before we just got started here. But this, because the Iroquois grew corn, they would grind it, and this was part of their milling operation, basically a mortar, and then they would use a stick or another rock as a pestle to grind it with. And this was found basically down Settlers Road. According to the picture, it was found on the Decker farm, which the Fairchild Creek flows through. And Dave told me that he was told that this rock was moved somewhere for safekeeping, and I'd never heard that before either, so it'd be interesting to know where it ended up. It's something like that. You wouldn't just throw it out in the garbage. All right, so anyway, the settlers that arrived, the white settlers that arrived in the Sheffield area, didn't have a whole lot of contact with natives because the ones who lived here had been cleared out by the Iroquois. There were the Mississaugas who had taken up hunting in the area, but they were hunter-gatherers. They didn't live in villages like this, and you weren't likely to come across them. They did find traces of a village down Settlers Road, apparently on Paul Main's farm. They found where there was a burial pit. The natives would collect their dead in scaffolds, and when they moved the village, then they would bury them all in a pit. It was their custom. So anyway, we kind of jump over a bit of a gap to when white settlers came into the area. And with Sheffield, the original settler, the founding settler, is fairly well known, John A. Cornell. A lot of communities the size of Sheffield don't really have a clear founder. Lots of different people settled in the area, and things just kind of grew up. But in some cases, you had a central figure that played a very important role. And John A. Cornell is a fascinating character. Of course, I do a whole bunch of talks just on him. But to summarize him, he had quite a resume, even though he wasn't really perhaps qualified for what would be on his resume. But he was both a doctor and served as doctor and lawyer. He didn't have any training as doctor or lawyer, but he just assumed those roles in the community because nobody else was doing it at the time. And he was also the founder of the community. And Niels, come on in.
Thank you. Sorry for being late.
Hey, that's all right. So, you missed the native part, which was kind of brief, and now we're talking about Sheffield's founder, John A. Cornell. So he also became a minister, which he trained himself to do as well. A settlement agent. He helped settlers get established in the community. He had homes, cabins for them to live in while they were getting their own homes started. And he was the first postmaster of the village. And I'm probably forgetting other things that he did as well, but I guess those are the main ones. And a bit of a mystery. Luckily for us, he did record a bit about his life. He published a book in 1825 that was mainly focused on the church that he had founded and what its doctrines were and its structure. But he did include a little autobiography, which was great, but I wish that it had more details. We don't know who his grandparents were, for example. It's believed that, for a long time we believed that he was descended from the Cornells who came from England in the 1600s and settled in Boston and then spread into New York State. Same as the founder, same ancestry as the founder of Cornell University. But there was never any proof because there's a dead end past his father. We don't know who his grandfather was. But thanks to DNA testing that a lot of people have done for family history purposes, they pretty much confirmed that his ancestors are the same ones that came to Boston. It's just that there's a lot of gaps to fill in between. And where he was born and originated from before he came to Sheffield is pinpointed there with the red marker. And it looks like it's in Massachusetts. It's just across the border from Massachusetts in New York State. And he was born at a place called Tower Hill, which doesn't really show up on any maps anymore, but it's pretty much down where that 22 is at the bottom of the map there, but off to the side. And actually was a tower. We went and checked it out a couple summers ago and drove up onto this hill. It's like a small mountain, really. It's near the Catskill Mountains. And nice view from there, but you can see how they might not have been happy with it as a place to farm. A lot of it is hill. There's another shot there. So that's Tower Hill in New York State, where he was born in 1782. And then the family moved to this place, which is now called Hillsdale, but at the time it was called Nobleton. And so Sheffield might have well ended up being called Nobleton rather than Sheffield, but we'll get to that a bit later. Anyway, the Cornells moved into this area. First, it was John A. Cornell's uncle Daniel, and this is another mystery as to exactly why he came to basically Christie's Corners, which is where the marker is there. He may have been settled, we know he was on a lot there, but he might have been at the lower end of the lot, which was below the escarpment, which is where the Copes, who founded Copetown, were settled. And some of the Cornells ended up staying in that area and marrying in with the Cope family. But anyway, Uncle Daniel arrived in at least 1794 and took up a piece of land at Christie's Corners. And funny enough, the only Cornells that are still in the Sheffield area, Paul Cornell and his family, are descended from Daniel Cornell. But it's not that they've been there this whole time. That part of the family has moved around quite a bit. And Paul didn't even realize until he moved into the area that he had some connection with it. But anyway, John came and paid a visit to his uncle in the year 1800, probably scoping out the opportunities here. A lot of Americans were coming here at that time. This was the frontier, and Britain had decided to try to attract as many Americans here as they could. We already had about 10,000 American loyalists come here after the American Revolution, and they had taken up land closer to Lake Ontario and the Niagara Peninsula, but they wanted to fill it up even more, and Lieutenant Governor Simcoe thought that there were lots of Americans who would prefer to be back under British authority again, and they gave the land to them for free, and lots of generous offers to try to attract them here. So the Cornells were part of a big wave that ended up coming here. Anyway, around this time, 1801, Daniel Cornell moves into Waterloo Township. And Waterloo Township, of course, doesn't exist anymore, but Preston and Kitchener and the city of Kitchener and Waterloo are part of it, and that's why it's not a township anymore. But anyway, if you're not familiar with this part of Waterloo, the Pioneer Tower Memorial Monument is in this area here. It's really contained within these loops of the Grand River. And this is where the first, what's considered to be the first settlers of Waterloo County came to when the Pennsylvania Germans started coming up. So if you go to the left from that marker there into that loop, the first two lots from the river headed back towards the marker were taken up by the Shirks and the Betzners, who were considered the first settlers of Waterloo County. The next farm over, right about where that marker is, John A. Cornell's father, Sylvanus Cornell, lot and a few more further to the east. And so that's where John and his brothers and sisters were living for a few years, and then they all started going out on their own. And this was 1802, and up until 1809, when John A. Cornell decided to come out here to what is now Sheffield. And where he settled, the best marker for that is this house that is still there. But of course, when he came, it was just a forest. And there would have been a trail. Highway was some kind of a trail. Some believe that it was a native trail that the settlers continued using. And it was the only trail in the whole area. So he came and built a log house in 1809. Somewhere in front of this stone house, which is right in the middle of the village. And then within the first couple of years of being there, he built a frame house and a barn. And we don't have any pictures of these, of course, unfortunately. And there's lots of questions. Why did he move out here? Why did he leave Waterloo? Lots of ideas, but the best one that I think explains it is that Waterloo Township was of course, very German-dominated, and Cornell comments that there was no opportunity for education in English at the time that they were living there. So he was looking at the prospect of his children not being able to go to school unless they learned how to speak German. And so it looks like he wanted to start somewhere where there would be better chance for education. Not a lot of people went to school at this time. School was pretty hit and miss, but Cornell himself had gone to school in New York State and put a high value on education. All right, so coming up a few years, just 3 years to 1812, it's a very significant year in Canadian history and in Sheffield history as well. And would have created quite a dilemma for people like Cornell. For the earlier Americans who came here, the Loyalists, they were mostly in favor of British rule and supportive of the British. But these later Americans who came, it was kind of hard to tell where their loyalties lay. And when the United States declared war on Britain and declared war on this colony, Upper Canada, there was a lot of concern about what these 30,000 Americans who had come for the cheap free land, what they were going to do, whose side they were going to join. And the Cornell family seems to have mostly sided with the British, as far as we can tell. Every man who was between 16 and 60 years old was obligated to serve in the militia at this time. And the call was put out that everybody was supposed to come and fight. There was a massive problem with people not showing up and with men deserting once they did show up. Whether John A. Cornell fought in the War of 1812 remains a mystery. It's hidden by the fact that, the name John Cornell shows up in the lists of men who served, but he had two cousins named John Cornell who were the same age basically as him and living basically in this area. So we have no way of knowing which one of them, if it was just one or all three of them were serving. Anyway, one of the dilemmas of the whole thing was the fear of ending up fighting against a neighbor on the other side, a cousin, even a brother. And one historian of the War of 1812 wrote a book and called it the Civil War of 1812, because it was basically a civil war, just like the American Revolution was. And there's stories of brothers meeting each other on the battlefield during this war as well. And there were still lots of Cornells in New York State, and that's where most of these soldiers were coming from to invade this province. And later on, one of these Cornells from New York State wrote a letter to Daniel Cornell, really scolding him for living in a British colony and saying, that he wouldn't take that whole province for free because it's living under tyranny, and you should send your children back home. Anyway, it was a very divisive war. And John A. Cornell's brother, Aaron, we know that he most definitely fought in the war because he was given a medal for being at the capture of Fort Detroit in 1812 under Sir Isaac Brock. And his family has held on to this medal, fortunately, and was able to get a picture of it. And there's a painting of the Americans surrendering Detroit to Isaac Brock. And it's funny, I never really thought much about the War of 1812 when I started doing Sheffield's history, because there was no battle that happened here. But it's only been in the last few years that I've learned that a lot of the men from this area actually took part in the war and were there at Detroit and Queenston Heights as well. Just by chance, the regiment of militia that they were in, the 2nd York Regiment, saw a lot of action in these places. And so they were there with Brock at Detroit and when Brock was shot at Queenston Heights. And you see lots of redcoat soldiers here, but in the lower left corner you've got one representative of the militia, and the militia that was right there with him was the 2nd York Regiment, which was made up of a large part of men from this area. So that represents somebody from right around here. There are several names who served and would have been at this battle, and Cornells as well. So anyway, back to the local scene opportunities for making a living apart from farming in this area was operating a hotel. And this hotel wasn't the type that would be built right away, usually, but this was on the way to Cambridge at the west end of the village. People would know it as the Williamson House. It was taken down when Highway 8 was bypassed around the village in the 50s. And it was actually supposed to be reassembled at Dune Pioneer Village. And about 20 years, I was very excited to go to Dune and see the hotel from Sheffield. And I found out when I got there, there's no hotel here. And we never got it put back together. It probably just rotted away in a pile somewhere. So you can't go to Dune and see this. But anyway, at the back part is the original log hotel, or tavern, or an inn, built by the Babcock family. And people say that along Highway 8 between Dundas and, well, between Hamilton and Waterloo, there would have been a tavern like this every mile. And this was somewhere you could stop for a meal and stop and sleep for the night as you were traveling. And of course, there was a big business in liquor there as well. Apparently, whiskey was quite big, and making it out of corn. So they had some kind of bourbon here, and now 200 years later, bourbon is really hot. But anyway, I don't know what their bourbon was like, but it's kind of interesting to find out. This was the drive shed for that Babcock Hotel, or the Hamill family ended up getting it later on. And this just came down about, I don't know, 10 years ago. And right in the village, this was known as the Deary Hotel, built by James Deary. I don't know if there was anything earlier, an earlier building for this. There probably was. And a lot of these hotels apparently had two entranceways, and one would be for people that were mainly interested in drinking, and the other one would be for those who thought that drinking was a horrible sin and didn't even want to see anybody drinking in case it was a bad influence on them. And so they would go through the side entrance. And while we're talking about that hotel, here is a new well being drilled there, circa 1902. And you can see between the hotel, there's nothing until you get to Don and Mary Knight's house. It's all open there at this time. Now, another hotel that was built along Highway 8, and anybody know what this place is called?
Romulus.
Thank you, Romulus, yes. So Romulus doesn't show up on the map anymore. I've seen a map from the 1860s that has Romulus on it, but by then it was very much in decline, and by 1900 this is all that was left of Romulus. And
so Romulus is different than Rockland.
Yes, yeah. Oh, sorry, was that Rockland?
Yeah, someone's around. I think it was Rockland, right? It's not Rockland.
No, that's Romulus.
Yeah. All right. No, it is Romulus, definitely. Yeah. So the building on the lower left side there was the hotel. In this picture, it doesn't look that impressive, but supposedly this was the biggest log building in the whole district, in the whole Gore district, full two-story log building. So that would be a very impressive hotel. It was considered kind of a halfway point between Dundas and Waterloo. The next building to the right there was a dairy. The fellow who ran this, Henry Lamb, produced butter and cheese there. And then the barn off to the right is the barn that you can still see the foundation from on the Norrock property. And gives you a bit of an idea where it was. The Highway 8 runs where you see the roadway there now, but at the time when Romulus was more thriving, it ran between those two buildings there on the left, and then they bypassed it around. And I would never have known what that picture was of, except that somebody in this Wentworth County history book did a sketch of it and identified it as being the hotel at Romulus. can see the remnants of this wooden addition that they put on for this sort of a cheap tavern that was there. A couple more things that go along with the War of 1812. There's a story in the local history that Henry Lamb, who wanted to build the great city of Romulus, it was going to be the crossroads of North America, like Rome. His dream, I mean, he got it going a little bit. It was a good-sized village at one point, early on, but it just kind of fizzled out. Anyway, there's stories about him having to fight off the natives, and that always mystified me that anybody around here would have to fight any natives off, because they just weren't really in the area at this time. The Six Nations were on their reserve, and the Mississaugas as well. And it's only in studying the War of 1812 that this has become clear. When Britain lost control of western Upper Canada around London and Windsor, they had a lot of native allies in the area that had been fighting against the Americans there. And they basically became refugees overnight and had to flee from the wrath of the American army as it was coming this way. And so they relocated, I'm not sure how many, quite a large number of natives, basically tried to base them where, at Burlington Heights at the head of Lake Ontario, where Dundurn Castle is, but they didn't have enough food for them. There wasn't enough food for the army, let alone the native refugees. So these natives had to go out and basically pillage to survive. And so the story of Henry Lamb having to fight them off most likely came from that situation. Another local family, the Sipes family, put in claims with the government for having 10 pigs stolen by the natives that were refugees. So it was a very common thing, and this area had a lot of claims put into the government for these kind of damages from those refugees. The Sipes family, I should mention them, another early family. They arrived here in 1812. They were loyalists and had settled at Niagara, had been given land near Fort Erie, right on the Niagara River. And when the war was getting started in 1812, they decided they didn't want to be right on the front line of the invasion, and they moved their family, which was 12 children, and they had land where the original Boss home farm was the land that was given to the Sipes for being loyalists. And so they intermarried with a lot of families. There's no Sipes here with the name today, but there are a lot of descendants. Anybody who's a Cullum descendant around here, which we have at least one person here tonight, and me as well, are descended from the Sipes. Also around this time, the Main family arrived. It's thought to be probably around 1811 that they showed up. And they took Lot 8, which is kind of the eastern half of the village. John A. Cornell had Lot 7. And back to Romulus here. Henry Lamb did get a grain grinding mill going here. Would have been an impressive building in its day, being made of stone. And it was still around in the 1950s at least. I don't know if anybody here remember this along the Fairchild Creek. The bridge there is where the 6th concession crosses the Fairchild Creek. But it was sold, somebody bought all the stone and relocated it to Aurora or somewhere, I'm not sure. So the milling business was also a good thing to get into, as well as the hotel keeping business. And a lot of these mills would have just been made out of wood. This is one that was kind of southwest of Sheffield on what people would know as the Browse Farm out along the 6th concession. And I was able to take this picture there and position myself downstream and hold it up and be able to identify the stonework, because the dam is still there, much as it is in this picture. So this was a sawmill. They also found when they were doing some excavating with a bulldozer that they dug into one section of dirt that was just made up mostly of ancient sawdust. It was probably 200 years old. So there would have been quite a few of these small sawmills in the area. This one may have still been working close to 1900, Sylvester Maine, whose diaries I've looked through, talked about going there and getting wood cut. All right, now into the 1830s, before that time, pretty much all the people in the area were Americans of some sort or another. You had the Loyalists like the Sipes, and then you had the later arrivals like the Cornells. After the War of 1812, the British reversed their policy on encouraging American immigrants and really slammed the door in their faces. They came very close. They tried to take the vote away from Americans here in Upper Canada, if you can imagine that. They were very suspicious of them because of the behavior of some of them during the War of 1812. Some of them actively fought against the British. They were all in a very tough situation. I mean, if this were to happen today, which I'm sure Donald Trump's not going to invade us, don't worry, but if you think about it, I mean, what would you do if the Americans threatened to invade our province and they turned it into one of the United States? Some of you might want to fight. Some of you might say, I don't think we're going to win, so let's not fight and just get this over with. And a lot of people did look at it that way, and some even thought, well, I'm going to help out, because I want to be in their good books when they take over. Two of John A. Cornell's daughters married into the Markle family, and one member of the Markle family led a group of soldiers who were all Canadians from here fighting against the British, so he became quite infamous. Anyway, because Americans weren't welcome anymore, the British encouraged migration from the British Isles, and we ended up getting a lot of Irish and Scottish, English and Welsh. The Cullums came at that time, the Grummets, the Willards. And because of it was a real population boom in this part of the province, and so there was a greater need for more institutions, more formal institutions. John A. Cornell had started a church in 1812, just preaching in his barn up the road there, and in his house, and other people's houses and barns, and just traveling around. And by the 1830s, there was a need to have a proper church building. And so this building was put up right where we're standing now, except that we would be probably standing on the roof of this building at the height we're at right now. But anyway, the story, the legend that goes along with this building was that they were trying to build it in 1832, and then the cholera epidemic came through, and so many people died that all the lumber that they had for building this church needed to be used for making coffins. And so they had to wait another 2 years for the community to get back on its feet and get enough lumber together. After this stone church was built in 1894, the wooden building was relocated down to the other side of the east side of the village, behind the home. Dave, what's the name of it?
Susan Kimball.
Doug and Susan Kimball live there today, beside the Zion Reformed Church. So the son uses a drive shed. And so other buildings were started in the 1830s as well. This store is probably one of the oldest stores in the area, and it's rented out as apartments now. It's beside David and Liz's place. And underneath, if you peel off all the siding, you'll find logs. It was a log store. And Sheffield, for quite a while, had two stores, right across the street from each other. And this one eventually had a post office, but originally Sheffield's post office was a separate building, a small building somewhere else in the village. Not exactly sure where. One interesting feature that's a little bit hard to make out, but the telephone pole on the left side of the store has a Bell telephone sign on it. And the store originally was the only place in the community that had the telephone. So at this time, people would come here to use that service. Now, the subject of the post office was kind of an important moment in Sheffield history because that's when Sheffield got the name Sheffield. Before that, it was called the Cornell Settlement because not only was John A. Cornell the founder here, but when he moved out of Waterloo Township, most of his family came here as well, except for his parents and one of his brothers stayed in the Preston area. The rest of them came out and settled all over this area, and so the Cornell Settlement was a pretty appropriate name for it. But anyway, when a community got a post office, that was usually a time where it would change its name from whoever the founder was to something that they thought was more appropriate or more humble, I guess. Now, why Sheffield was chosen is still a bit of a mystery. People have often assumed it was named after Sheffield, England. But if you'll notice on the map here, Hillsdale with a little red dot at the top there where Cornell grew up is not very far away from Sheffield, Massachusetts. And the speculation would be that, well, actually, this part isn't speculation. Cornell didn't think much of his hometown of Hillsdale. Looking back in 1825, when he was very religious, he said that it was a place that had perfected the art of wickedness to a great degree, something like that. So it's not surprising that Sheffield was not called Hillsdale or Nobletown as it was before. So he would have been looking somewhere else for inspiration, and Massachusetts, generally a more religious state with its Puritan founders, probably more inspiring to him, but who knows, there might be some other reason that he chose the name Sheffield, maybe something really good happened to him in Sheffield, Massachusetts, hard to say. Here's the Sheffield Post Office. Sheffield has its own police force too. And there's a nice covered bridge there. All right, back to this Sheffield here. Don't know when the blacksmith shop was started, but at this location, which is at the main intersection in Sheffield, there was the first schoolhouse in Sheffield was built there, and it was built out of logs in 1823. And the blacksmith shop often, as you can see in this picture, was paired up with a wagon making shop. The house behind there, which still exists here in Sheffield and is lived in, had that ramp around the side of it so that they could take wagons that they built upstairs to do the paintwork upstairs. And then that would keep basically a painting room where there wouldn't be a bunch of sawdust floating around like there would be on the main floor of the shop. And the blacksmith would provide the services needed for making wagons and sleighs, the metal parts that were needed, especially for tire, for the steel tires for the wooden wheels. The Sheffield blacksmith shop also had a weigh scale. You can see down there in the right-hand corner. I'm sure that wasn't there in the early days, but by 1900 at least there was a weigh scale there. Down on the right-hand side it says Ernie Scales. There's a little platform, and there isn't much to see, but there is a weigh scale there, so that's a service that farmers can pay them for to know how much a load of hay or grain weighs. All right, now back to the topic of schools. The home of Doug Kimball was a schoolhouse originally, built to replace that log house where the blacksmith shop was. You can see the old church that used to be here back to the right-hand side there. By 1900, people were living in it as a residence, and it became the manse for this church shortly after that time as well. Now, this house was also planned to be a schoolhouse. This is on Settlers Road. This is the house that started on fire a couple years ago and is still waiting to be demolished and a new house built. And according to one history book, it was a schoolhouse, but then somebody who actually, one of the main family that lived there, told me that it was planned to be one, but they didn't actually use it for that. And into the 1840s now, the Methodists were operating in the area, and the Methodist denomination was very popular in this province. And it came from the United States, another branch came from Britain, the Wesleyan Methodists. And it was the Wesleyan Methodists that built this church here on the Grummet property on the west side of the village. This is property owned by Bob Breen, and you can see it from the street, of course. And same style as the wooden building that was here. A lot of the schools and churches and township halls were built in this same style, very, very simple and plain. Another church in the area, now this was on Settlers Road, down towards the end of Settlers Road, kind of across from where Ted Wilson lives, if you know where that is. Now this was a church and sort of a community building for the local black community, which a lot of people are probably not aware that there was one here, but there was a community of basically they were fugitive slaves who came on the Underground Railroad to Canada, and there was a movement to settle them on small farms in the countryside. A lot of them had ended up in cities at first, and they weren't really too welcome there. They didn't want them congregating together too much, so they tended to ship them out into the country if they could. And there, along the 5th concession and over towards Brampton, there apparently were a number of these small farms that these fugitive slaves were set up on. They weren't made welcome, as far as I've heard, in local churches very much, and so they ended up having their own church, which was under the Free Methodist denomination. And the Free Methodist denomination was popular with blacks and also with abolitionists. And there were a number of people in Sheffield that show up on the census as being Free Methodist, including the owner of that property there. Their last name was Heath. And according to local legend, this Heath actually went and fought in the Civil War against the South because of his beliefs against slavery. Now, at the same time, the Free Methodists are believed to have met in this building, which is the Everingham House. And at the time that it was used as a church meeting place, it was only about 1/3 of it was there. The part to the right was all that it was, so you can imagine that's a pretty tiny building. And then after it stopped being used by the Free Methodists, apparently the blacksmith bought it for his house and added the eastern left-hand section onto it to make that H shape. The Free Methodists also met in this building, which you can see is traveling down Highway 8, the home of Peter and Judy Crawford, Sheffield Ironworks today. You can see the Dave Foreman's house there just to the left of it. And if you want to see its original location, you look in the left-hand side of the picture there. The angle is a little bit funny. This is the front yard of Mr. Kolenko's yard here, where they've got the boy posing with the animals. And so you're looking at quite an angle across there to that. But it's basically just right over there, kitty corner to the building that we're in right now. And that was used as a meeting hall. A couple of businesses, like a seamstress, was set up in there at one point, and the Free Methodists were in there as well. And here's all the horses that pulled this building down the highway. And sadly, they weren't able to pull it all the way. It got bogged down in the mud, and they had to call on a new invention called a steam tractor to pull it the rest of the way. This is Ron Ellis's house, west of the village, and it was used for the local justice of the peace would hold court sessions there at times, and according to Ron, there were bars on, I don't know if there was bars on the window still, but apparently there were bars on the window there that you could actually lock somebody up in if you needed structure in the area that you would have found in a number of places was were lime kilns. And this one was at the very point where Waterloo County, Wentworth County, and Grant County intersect, which is on the Donkers farm on the 6th concession. And getting limestone is very easy in this part of the country, of course, very close to the surface. And there's a great need for lime that had been processed so that you could use it for making mortar and making plaster and whitewash. And it could be used as fertilizer as well, and for making concrete.
Yeah, in fact, I remember that one. It was there in the 1950s.
Oh, was it? Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know when it was still there, so.
Assuming it's on the north,
Yes.
the one I'm thinking it was on the north side of the 6th concession.
Yeah, that's the one, it was on the north side, yeah. So there's the pump. You needed a good supply of water when you were doing this process of burning lime and slaking it. All right, now into the 1850s, and probably one of the biggest things that happened at this time was the railroads being built, and Branchton owes its existence and its name to being a branch of the Great Western Railroad. And this opened up all kinds of opportunity for local farmers to expand the markets that they could ship their goods to. And it also opened up a lot of opportunities for travel. You could go to the train station and get to all kinds of wonderful places from there. It looks a lot like somebody's backyard, but if you look just to the right of it, it is a train station. The platform is just around the corner there. Anybody remember the Branchton train station still being there?
Yes. I can remember going there to get coal with my dad.
Right.
Well, sorry, I can't remember the station, but I remember the shed where they dumped off the coal,
Mm-hmm.
which is not quite the same thing.
In connection with that, a lot of these pictures that I'm showing are taken by Sylvester Main, who is standing there in this picture with his hand on that press. So we're really lucky that there was somebody like him, an amateur photographer, taking pictures when it was really a new thing to go out and outside a studio. Before that, the technology was limited to being in a studio, or during the American Civil War, you could take a darkroom in a covered wagon, but you had to process your negatives immediately, and you know, that limited things quite a bit. This opened up a whole new world, and you can get pictures of all kinds of things now. And anyway, very interesting character. We could do a whole presentation on Sylvester Main. But when he first got his camera in 1898, he recorded in his journal that he was working on a crew that was barreling apples. They were going from farm to farm, barreling apples, and then shipping them out from the Branchton train station. And you might think that he's trying to make apple cider there in a barrel, but that's just a barrel press. It's really not to press all the juice out of the apples. It's just to tighten the lid on so that everything's nice and firm and the apples aren't rattling around in there. All right, also in the 1850s is when Sheffield got the first doctor, which was Dr. Lundy. And I'm not exactly sure if Dr. Lundy started this house, which people know as the Seton House. I believe he lived on Student Road originally. And there were a number of doctors between Dr. Lundy and Dr. Seton. Well, I have to ask, did anybody here, is anybody here a patient of Dr. Seton? Did you run and hide when he was coming, or? I heard a few people talk about that. All right, now into the 1860s is when the more familiar Sheffield School was built, 1862. How many people went to the Sheffield School here?
What, the one over there?
Yeah,
I did.
I had gym class in that building.
They closed it and then reopened it and moved the Scotch people into it.
Oh, right, they were doing all that. So here's a shot shot inside the Sheffield school, Christmas 1899, I think. And you can see how they're arranged with the younger children at the front and getting older as you work your way back. And I think there's 2 or 3 people that have been identified, but it's people that I talked to about 10 or 15 years ago, being able to recognize their parents when they were kids. So it's quite a gap when you're trying to figure out who these children are. Now, something else in the 1860s of significance, and this was something that was going on across Ontario, the cheese-making industry got going. And the Malcolm family got into this, and they actually had their farm by the Safari at the corner of Cooper Road and Safari Road. And this red brick house is still, the ruins of it are still there. It burned down a number of years ago. And they, I believe they had the factory, a cheese factory on that farm. So that may have been the first cheese factory in the area. The Harvey family, which had a farm between Sheffield and Branston, and there's a lot of pictures of it taken by Sylvester May, because he married into the family. They had a cheese factory on their farm as well, and they were involved in the factory, the Cheese Factory Road in Cambridge is named after, which also got going around the same time. There was another cheese factory, which probably wasn't the Malcolms, the Lang family, which had the Sheffield store before the Bond family. They had a cheese factory, and apparently it was located somewhere between the Humphreys and the Halls on the east part of the village. Do you know anything about that, Dave? We're not.
I used to tell me about it. He had some pictures of the pigs that we used to feed the bird off to at the back. And they were in that low spot.
Yeah, I mean, the wagon here looks like it's got boxes of cheese on it, and it's coming from your direction. So it's probably coming from that factory. But there's no pictures that I've ever come across of the factory that was there. This is the one that's really, people really know as the Sheffield Cheese Factory. And this was just beside the ballpark, just past the ballpark as you're heading south. And Sylvester Maine worked in there. My great-grandfather worked in there. I think he's one of the guys in the window there. And you can see there's a kind of a crane. I guess you can see it better in this picture. There's a crane there that they can use to get the cans of milk and swing them in through the door there. And then there's a weigh scale inside the doorway there, so they can record how much milk each farmer has brought. But a lot of villages, at least the size of Sheffield, or smaller or bigger, had cheese factories that got going back around this time. But by 1900, when this picture was taken, a lot of them had been closed down. The government health regulations had been increased, and a lot of them shut down. And this factory burned probably not too long after this. Why it burned, people have speculated, but anyway, the main part there with the scales and the crane did survive and was used as a house. And my father talks about the day it burned down when he was a student at the Sheffield school, and Mrs. Foreman sent him out to go see what was going on. And he just went and watched and didn't go back and report what was going on. There's another angle on the cheese factory. You can see the red brick church in the background there. See the red brick church here. So, coming up into the 1880s, and a lot of churches started improving their buildings and making much fancier buildings than the plain ones that they got started with. I think it was 1884. It's on the dates for this one that the Methodists upgraded this one. And I looked through some of the records for it, and they built it in just a few months. And nowadays, it's amazing to look back at how quickly they did some of these things. And don't know if you can see it, there's, well, it's pretty hard to see here. The wall, the stone wall down to the right there has an advertisement painted on it. It's like a billboard, but somebody just took some paint and wrote the words on it, like come and shop at Joe's Tailor Shop in Galt, something like that. And there's the inside of that church. This is probably more like the 1920s. And then in 1894, this was United Brethren in Christ denomination at the time, and I'm sure that they felt a bit jealous maybe, or maybe, well, no, they wouldn't feel jealous, I'm sure, but decided they needed to keep up with the Methodists and had this stone building built. The stone came from, well, the Grouse Farm, that some people might know it, or the Studeman Farm on the 6th concession. And at this point, the walls had not been built around it yet. So it looks pretty lonely there and older. And in this picture, you can see they've got, they've started building some of the stone sheds for parking your horses and buggy, and they still have the old wooden building just peeking out behind there. They just shifted it to the back, and they hadn't sold it yet to the main family. Now this was taken probably not long after the church was built. I believe this was the Ladies' Circle, and they did a fair bit of fundraising to pay for the building of the church. And they have really spectacular hats, so enjoy the hats. And that was the minister at the time, Reverend William Carstead, who apparently was quite active in the idea of building this church. And then here's the interior. It's kind of funny having the picture of the interior projected onto the very same wall that you see in the picture. And maybe somewhere under that, you can paint the plaster, you can see that banner there. Do you remember that?
He had it painted on the wall that way, red over. Of course, now we put drywall over top, so you wouldn't even be able to straight down to it.
Maybe some archaeologists from the future will uncover it. All right, now I'm just going to go through a bit of some farming shots here that Sylvester Maine took, circa 1900. And farming at this time was a mix of cattle and chickens and pigs. See them all here. Horses for power, of course. Sheep had kind of fallen out for the pioneers, like Cornell. They would have been important, that the women would have been using that wool to make their own clothing, which is pretty hard to imagine nowadays, but that was the way it was done. But by this time, it was a lot more economical to buy clothing, buy at least the cloth and make the clothing yourself, but they kind of bypassed the sheep for most people. And for mixed farming, I always like to show this. In mixed farming, you didn't want it so mixed that the pigs would be stealing the milk from the cow, but I guess that could happen sometimes. Sylvester Maine's pictures are always kind of funny in the way that everybody gets everyone kind of thrown together into these poses that probably didn't happen too often naturally during the day. But anybody know what these are? Trick question. No, they're not sheep or moose. They're not poodles. Yeah, they're goats. They're Angora goats. And circa 1900, the Angora goat skin was a big part of the fashion. And so there was a good market for raising these creatures. Dairying was big at this time, partly because the cheese factories had provided, I mean, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. They were working together and providing a good opportunity for increasing your dairy herd. This is the Harvey farm, as I was mentioning, between Sheffield and Branston. And they ended up with their own cheese factory. Now, as far as cultivating the land and the source of power, for the pioneers, oxen were preferred. They were sturdy animals and could rough it better than horses in the pioneer conditions. These are probably the last oxen in this area. They're actually from Kirkwall. They were used as part of a sawmill that was still operating there. And there's still parts of North America where oxen are used in logging operations because they're well suited for it and they don't tend to damage the forest as much. But by 1900, horses had won the battle over who was going to pull the plow and who was going to pull the new implements that were being made, because these new implements, like the mechanical grain binder, need to be pulled at a certain speed in order for them to function properly. And the speed they chose was not the slower speed of the ox, because of course we want to be more efficient and get things done faster. And so it was around this time too that you started getting these massive horses brought over from Europe, like the Percherons. They're in this picture, the Belgians and the Clydesdales. Before that, most people had kind of a mongrel sort of a horse that had been around in North America for a long time. And, there was one type known as the Canadian, and they were very well suited for the climate here, but they weren't as big as that. But at the same time these massive horses were coming in, this was coming in as well. And this was the first tractor in the Sheffield community. Now, it wasn't really owned by a full-time farmer. These guys made a living investing in this expensive piece of equipment and then hiring it out for rent on the farms in the area. And it's a steam engine. It's basically like a train steam locomotive, except that it doesn't need to go on a track. It has its own traction, and so the original name for it was a steam traction engine, and that eventually got shortened down to tractor. The guy on the left is Robert Drone. I believe he owned the traction engine, and then this fellow Jack Hood worked with them operating it, and I believe they live in the village, from what I understand. And a lot of their work was thrashing, taking around a thrashing machine, the precursor to the combine, to separate your grain seeds from the chaff and the straw. Steam engines could be used for a number of different things, though, and this is one of my favorite pictures here, filling a silo with, there's a cutting box hooked up by the belt to that steam engine, and that's a portable steam engine there. It's not a tractor. You'd have to use horses to pull that around. Or you could use another steam engine, but that would be kind of silly. There's a water tank beside it, with a pump on it, and then the elevator. Most people are not used to filling a silo. I have to ask you, has anyone ever filled a silo with an elevator before? No? Most people are used to a blower. And then silos were also new around this time. Originally, a silo was a pit in the ground that you stored things in. And then in North America, they started making these giant barrels above ground to store things in. And so the first ones were built like giant barrels, big wooden staves with metal bands around them, just like a small barrel. But they soon made them out of all kinds of things: stone, brick, tile, concrete. Steam engines also became very popular for drilling wells. Most people had a dug well that would be not likely more than 30 feet deep at the time. And with these operations, you could get down to 100 feet or so. The steam engine in this picture, if you can see it up close, it says Waterloo Manufacturing Company, which was a big operation in Waterloo at one time, of course, no longer there. And I can't remember now, Graham, I think their name is Graham, that owned this operation. And the story with some of these well drilling guys guys was that when they came to drill a well, it could take them a few weeks to get the job done on your property. And the amount of time that it actually took them often related quite a bit to, they were living with you and you were feeding them, so it would relate to how much they enjoyed the cooking in the home that they were staying with, for how quickly they finished their work. Steam engines were used in sawmills at this time as well. The one at Kirkwall that had the oxen was steam powered. There were portable portable sawmills as well. And this one was set up at Westover. And as you can see, it came to an untimely end when the boiler of the steam engine exploded. So there were some real dangers working with steam as well. And the explosion was heard for miles around, and chunks of the boiler went flying all over the place. And there's a picture there of some of those pieces.
Nobody was hurt?
Yeah, a couple of people were killed in the accident. They were the only ones that were there in the mill. This was taken at Valens, a wood cutting bee. Imagine having to cut all your firewood with the two-man saw. A lot of bigger barns were put up around this time in the area as well. This barn is on the farm on Settlers Road, which is the Souza Braga family. Now the Wise family lived there for quite a while. And it was a Maine that was there, a brother of Sylvester Maine. And Sylvester Maine was a builder amongst other things. And so this was one of the barns that he built. And of course, he didn't build it himself, as you can see in the picture. It took a lot of numbers to get those timbers raised into place. In the one side to the left, you can see some poles leaning against the structure there on an angle. They've got spikes in the end of them, and they would use those to put the sections up into place with all the guys pushing on them, and with ropes coming from the other side as well. And it was kind of a tradition when you did these kind of operations to be a little bit daring and maybe even reckless. And you can see those two guys at the top there just standing there and being a little bit daring. And this one, I would love to know where it was. I know it is somewhere around here, and I investigated a lot of barns. The one that I thought it was, I managed to find a picture of while that barn was burning 50 years ago, and I could see all the beams through where the fire burned away the siding, and could see that it wasn't the right one. This one is at the end of Settlers Road, where the McAllister family is now. That was one of the original Cornell farms that John A.'s brother Joseph settled on. And this is the mystery barn raising, the dinner afterwards. You can see if you look at all the people sitting there eating, those are all the guys. There's no women sitting at the table there. They were preparing the meal and serving the meal while the guys were putting up the barn. And the only one I've been able to really recognize in the very far left front bench there is John Harvey, whose farm I've seen some pictures from, and who had a cheese factory. And this is his daughter, Annie Harvey, who married the photographer Sylvester Maine. And I believe this was taken during their honeymoon. And it was almost a literal honeymoon, because this is maple syrup making. And in Sylvester Maine's journals, he talks about, he records, got married today, and then for the next couple of weeks, making maple syrup. So this is their honeymoon. So people were using sugar shacks and evaporator pans starting around this time, but you would also find people using the older cauldron method. And this may be what's going on. This is on the Harvey farm. That's Nancy Harvey, who maiden name Nancy Cornell. She was a granddaughter of John A. Cornell. She could possibly be doing something else, like making soap, but most likely it's maple syrup. All right, I'm coming up into World War I era, and these are mostly, pretty much all the guys, there might be missing one or two, from the Sheffield area that fought in World War I. Only one of them died, and not too many of them were injured, so they got through it very fortunately. And they used to march up and down the highway for training down to Rockton, to what some people still call the drill shed, which is where the poultry exhibit is put on quite often. And there was an earlier building there, an earlier drill shed put up for training the militia when the Fenian threat happened in the 1860s. And this one replaced it. This is during World War II, and that's Dr. John Seaton there in the church, the red brick church, putting on a film, and I'm not sure what it was exactly, but it was to try to raise money for a war-related cause, I believe. He also, it may be, he filmed all the guys that went off to fight in World War II. He had them come over to his place and get a relatively early movie camera, and he would do a recording of each of the young men. This is in the Sheffield Cemetery. Just throw that in there. It's a Sunday school teacher, Russell Main, cousin of the photographer. And some homes in the area. This is where the Everts family lives on the north part of, well, sort of the north part of Seaton Road. We have the current owner of this house here tonight. The Kalenkos live here now. This is where the photographer Sylvester Main grew up. And those are his parents, Stephen Main and Rosetta Collins. House down Highway 8 towards Rockton. It's the house that I live in. Very hard to recognize. A lot of the houses have changed quite a bit in the last 100 years, and some of them may still be around but are very hard to recognize. This is a house right in the village where, is there a Ferber that's living there still now? John Ferber? I don't know where he lives. The Joblings. That's their house. Anyway, it was a Cornell family that lived there, and these two ladies are riding side saddle. It's kind of neat to see the sidewalk that's there at the time as well, wooden sidewalk. And the same two ladies, one of them may be kind of hard to tell, she's a maid, but I don't know what the story is behind that. And that's inside that same house. And that's the brother and the woodpile inside the house there. You can see the Knight's house in the background. And you can see the Neils. I can see your place there too.
The left there.
Yeah, yeah. And this was a house along Safari Road near where Bob Cullen lives. And not there anymore. And I forget this old guy's name here, but Sylvester Main lived there and took some kind of artistic shots around the place. And sometime not long after, it looks like it's completely abandoned. This farm along the 6th concession, west of here, Sylvester Main's uncle farmed there. Andy had a business there, repairing and building wagons. The Harvey farm that I've been mentioning. The building at the bottom of the hill is a spring house, so water spring came up in there and was used to keep things cool. And that's probably where they were storing the cheese that they were making in their factory on the farm there. This house is still standing just on the way to Cambridge on the highway there. It was the Hamill family, which one member of the family went on to found a clothing company in Guelph. They had a porch that went all the way around. And right next to the Palmers, you recognize this place. And you can see the house that was being replaced, the scaffolding is kind of wedged in between the new and the old there. And this house has got kind of a funny story. When you look at where the walls meet the roof, quite a lot of wall above the window before we get to the roof. And the story was the stonemason in charge was John Rappel Sr., and he left to go on a trip with his family, and he left his workers to finish off while he was gone for a while. And apparently none of them really understood when they were supposed to stop, so they just kept going, and they made the walls extra high. And they just left it like that. And then this house in the village had the opposite happen to it. Apparently it was one story originally, and they decided to raise it up to 2 stories, and they jacked up the roof as they were doing that and built the stone under it. And apparently they got to a point where there was a pretty big windstorm starting up, and they had to make the decision whether they wanted to risk losing their roof or have walls that were not quite as high as what they might have originally wanted. So they put the roof down where it was. Yeah, it's at the corner of the main intersection there. That was the column, well, that was a column home, Nelson Missouri column. That's your grandparents, Keith, or great-grandparents?
It's Keith's great-grandparents.
And one interesting feature is, does anybody see Santa Claus? Does he look like somebody you want to put a child on his lap? Santa back then was generally kind of a spirit character. Goes back to the origins of being used more to scare children than to reward them. And there's somebody's Christmas tree back at the time. Yeah. Another interior shot here, the ladies' banjo was popular at this time, circa 1900. Other pastimes, people would spend the day at a lake on a Sunday afternoon. This is Blue Lake near St. George. It was a popular destination. It wasn't quite as popular after they built this cement factory there and kind of drained it. They were scooping out marl and stuff off the bottom. Hunting, of course, very popular. Sleigh riding. It's a little winter scene on the Harvey farm. Bicycles were kind of a new thing at this time, and there were different ideas of how to make them. I've never seen too many of this model before. You do a big workout for your arms. And bears were still a popular form of entertainment at this time. These guys traveled around, and you could wrestle the bear if you wanted to. They would do tricks, climb a telephone pole. And I like this picture just to see what the countryside looked like There used to be a lot more fences. Fields were a lot smaller. A lot of rail fences. And you can see the newer wire fencing was coming in at this time to replace the rail fences. To start to replace it, it's still not fully replaced, of course. I'm just going to wind up here with some of the, probably the biggest impact on rural communities was the automobile around this time. This was probably the first car in this community, the Model T Ford, bought by Sylvester Main's brother-in-law and cousin. And this really put an end to a lot of local businesses. When Sylvester Main was younger, in his diary, he recorded there being a shoemaker in Sheffield, a tailor, but they were soon to go out of business, and people being able to get further, travel further more quickly, and get into towns to buy things cheaper, put an end to a lot of local industries. And some of these early cars ended up becoming the first tractors on some farms. I know that was the case on our farm. This is Sylvester Main's son Harvey. They called these auto tracks, auto tractors. Some businesses were able to adapt to the new age of automobiles. The blacksmith shop became a gas station and garage, owned by the Derby family. And I finish up in the 1930s just with a couple of shots for the sports fans here. Well, I think Dave's not here, so I'm one of the sports fans. But anyway, that's the Sheffield hockey team, competing against teams from various villages along the highway and here and there. And that's the Sheffield baseball team from about the same time, about 1936.
Could you go backward?
Yep.
The second row, the third guy in from the right, that's Jim Patrick.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm gonna say, I'm not sure, I think the guy 3 over, that might be Bill Main.
3 over from where?
Go to your left from
Yeah.
Jim Patrick, I think that's Bill Main. The rest I don't recognize.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I don't have the names handy to list anymore. I know my grandfather is the guy standing in the very middle of the back row. But, yeah. All right, so that is the end of the whirlwind tour through Sheffield history. Let's turn the lights on. If anyone has any questions or comments?
There's no mention of the native, the native village that would be across from where Barry McConnell's now.
I didn't even know that, I've never heard of that one before.
Well, I know when I was a kid, in the field between Bill Jensen's laneway and the creek, people would be in there all the time looking for arrowheads. And I recall,
Oh, yeah, right.
and at one time I had a couple, which I've long since lost.
Now, did they ever have any kind of dig there where they found traces of a village? Or is it just a lot of arrowheads?
I never saw anybody beyond scooping the first few inches of soil, or examining the first few inches. Like, I never saw, like a backhoe or anything in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, now they do things with ground penetrating radar and don't necessarily have to dig to figure out some of these things, but it's still an expensive thing. It can only be done in small areas. There probably were quite a few native villages over the years throughout the area. Any other questions or comments?
When did they clear the majority of the trees?
And yeah, as you saw in the pictures of the landscape, it looked pretty pretty cleared out, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, they really didn't like, the pioneers didn't really like trees. They kind of saw them as the enemy and that they were fighting a battle against. And they would usually keep a certain number of acres of their farm with trees for firewood and so on. But I haven't done a full study of that. You could study that because in the censuses that they did, that was something they would record, is the number of cleared versus uncleared acres on each farm. But I've never analyzed it for, when you really have to get into it and graph it out and all that. That would be kind of interesting. But the working on your own, I think they said it would take a man 3 years to clear an acre or something like that. They often would have clearing bees where they would get together and they could get it done more efficiently and more quickly. But I think a lot of the original pioneer generation would only get a small part of their farm cleared and it would be up to the next couple generations to finish the job.
So how did they clear that? Did they make fire or?
Pioneers couldn't take trees down with the two-man saw. At the time, it wasn't designed so that it could cut a tree down. It couldn't sweep the sawdust out when it was horizontal. It could only saw vertically. So they were all taken down with axes, except the biggest trees. They would often just kill them by girdling the bark off of them and just letting them die and letting them fall down. But yeah, most of what they cut down, they ended up burning on the ground. They would kind of pull it together into heaps with the oxen and set it on fire because there was just no way of getting that much wood to any kind of a market. Everybody had lots of wood, so nobody really had a demand for it. If you're on some kind of a river, then you could possibly float it down somewhere to a village or town where it could be sold. But most of it just went up in smoke, and they used the ashes as fertilizer and for making lye for soap. And they used whatever they could for their own purposes, but most of it wasn't needed. They had towards Cambridge, just between Sheffield and Galt, there was an oak tree that they called the Beverly Oak, and they said it was it was a landmark